Liberty Coin Services Things You Need to Know series. I'm your host, Patrick A. Heller, Owner Emeritus and Communications Officer. I'm here at Freedom Fest in Las Vegas, and I have as a guest here with me today Patrick Byrne, who's founder and CEO of Overstock.com. Welcome, Patrick.
Patrick, it's nice to know there's a few of us left. As the old Irishman used to say.
You started taken a small company and made a pretty good success about it, but along the way you've had some experience and litigation to do with market manipulation. Can you talk about your professional development there and what you've experienced with market manipulation?
Sure. First thing is I grew up around Wall Street. My family was sort of I grew up around Wall Street. Mr. Buffett in Omaha was my great rabbi in life and tutor. And so I used to work 30 years ago there. So I had one impression of Wall Street. Overstock, we went public in 2002. And once we went public, when you're a public company CEO, you're out there in the belly of the beast. You're out there in the mix. You're out there with hedge funds and prime brokers and regulators and journalists. And I had to say that within a fairly short time, my antennae picked up that there was a bunch of mischief going on. And in some cases, I was asked directly to take part in it. So I just sort of swam around for 2 or 3 years taking mental notes. And then 10 years ago, we're coming up on the 10-year anniversary, I came out and said, there's a whole bunch of criminality going on Wall Street. I'm going to explain it to the world. I was kind of a one-man Occupy Wall Street. And for about 3 years, Wall Street, I was heavily criticized within the financial press. I was making a bunch of claims about how the market was being rigged, and there were these different ways of rigging it. And so it was very difficult to get the regulators to listen to me. But then in 2008, when everything Chernobyled, suddenly they went and did an emergency order doing exactly what I'd been spanking them for 4 years, telling them that they had to do. And so since that time, so everybody figured out there were a bunch of stories that I turned out to be right about all this stuff. But and since then, there's been all these cases that have come out. The common denominator of which is there are various ways of rigging the market. And if you're a theoretician, you don't believe that because the markets are perfectly efficient and God's in His heaven and everything was worse. But if you really understand in the depths of the technology of the market, there's actually ways it can be that there's loopholes in the rules that let certain players who know how to manipulate them actually can rig the market, and that's the common denominator of a lot of things that have come out.
Yeah, there's an editor of a newspaper in Connecticut named Chris Powell who says there are no more markets, there are only manipulations.
Correct.
Do you think it's that bad?
Well, certainly there's heavy manipulation in global markets by governments and central banks. And look what happened in China today. In the last 3 weeks, China's melted down 33%. That's because it was a bubble created by the government, which made it harder for people to sell stocks and easier to borrow money to buy more. It's purely in our system. Yes, I think that the whole goal of QE, the stated goal, both Bernanke and Janet Yellen said on various occasions, was to create the wealth effect. And the wealth effect is you make the stock market go up. The central bank makes the stock market go up, and as people's 401ks go up, they start thinking that they can spend more, and that is a way of driving the economy. Well, it's just like in 2007, about 7% of our 2007 economy was driven by household refinancings. People refinanced $1.4 trillion, out of which they spent $1 trillion. Out of a $15 trillion economy in 2007 was purely froth created by government manipulation. So that's just one form of manipulation. There's all kind of criminal manipulations that go on as well. But the central banks, when they manipulate the market, that lends credence to the statement you just quoted. The fellow from Connecticut, Chris Powell. I think I read that article a couple of weeks ago or a month ago or so, saying it's all just a big manipulation now.
I have written at length over the years how I perceive the prices of precious metals to be suppressed, with the United States government being the primary beneficiary of that actions. Do you have any insight yourself on precious metals in particular being manipulated?
Having become as familiar as I am with the securities markets and how the chain of property title works and how much slop there is in those titles when it comes to securities, I'm very receptive, let's say, to this rumor that there's a huge naked short position, that there's been far more what is in essence fractional reserve banking without a reserve requirement, that for every X many people who think they own an ounce of silver in some vault in London, for every ounce of actual silver there's X many people who think they own it. What is X? You hear numbers like 99 and stuff like that. Who knows? Do you know?
Yes. Jeffrey Christian of CPM Group testified before Congress that there's only 1 ounce of gold in the London vaults for every 100 ounces of open contracts.
Well, that's problematic. At some point, see, it's the finance geeks, the finance quants. Unfortunately, you can get your PhD in finance and no one ever teaches you any economics, and they don't understand there is no free lunch. That in the perfect world of their Greek letters, you can do that and none of it matters. It all comes out in the wash. So they don't understand that there is this property of reflexivity, as George Soros called it, that these are, at some point, these derivative contracts, these positions, these are contracts for difference. It's a type of derivative with a particularly explosive quality. And so they can convince themselves that you can have a market work that way. But in material science, let me sum this up. In material science, there's a concept, what do they call it? A shear strength. And that's the point at which the molecules in a metal stop flowing smoothly past each other and it becomes a jagged flow. You can have the same thing in a marketplace. When the prices stop flowing smoothly past each other, it can shear. And I think a market can shear under these kinds of stresses just like a metal can shear.
Okay. Do you have any personal thoughts on owning precious metals yourself?
Well, if you do I own precious metals. And if you do own precious metals, you want to own precious metals. You don't want to own a slip of paper that some bank gave you that said this is a claim on some number of coins or something somewhere, because you can't trust them. They may be telling, for every actual coin they have, they may be telling a bunch of people they own it, and the day that they all melt down, everybody gets a haircut or something, and you find out you own a lot less than. If you want to own precious, and it's so funny when I hear people say they invest in gold for their personal safety, and then all they mean is they have a bank statement from somebody, some institution that says they have some gold. You got to own the gold. You got to own, if you're going to invest in precious metals, you want to own and physically possess the metals.
Greece has been in the news a lot lately for their financial woes. People have been taking their money out of their bank accounts and stuffing it under their mattress, or in some cases buying gold. But if any of those people happen to put it in a safe deposit box in a bank in Greece, they haven't been able to get into it for 9 days now.
Right. Yeah, well, in the U.S., when banks go under, you can't go and access your safe deposit box either. Greece is probably going to get a big bail-in, and they're saying 30% of everyone's deposits over 8,000 euros, something like that. But who knows what they're going to do, or revert to the drachma or whatever. But it's not, in the U.S. when banks go under, you can't hit your. When Roosevelt had a 2-week banking holiday in 34 or something?
1933.
33. That too, you couldn't access your safe deposit box then.
Yeah, about a third of the banks closed and never reopened. Now you're also an advocate and a fan of Bitcoin, electronic money. Can you tell our listeners how that started with you?
Well, it started actually when a journalist. So I actually used to study the math that underlies cryptography. And so a few years ago when I read about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, I recognized, this is that stuff I use, based on that stuff I used to study. So I kept an eye on it. Then about a year and a half ago, there was a Senate hearing where they had a bunch of folks in from Treasury and different groups to say, is this stuff illegal? And basically the Treasury people and everyone else consulted said, Basically, we're not sure whether we like it or not, but it's not illegal. So a journalist asked me a couple weeks later, you kind of implement it. And I said in an offhand way, it's like maybe sometime next year, 2014. And she mentioned that on December 19th or so of 2013. And that mention got picked up all over the world. And it made me realize, this is much bigger than I had expected. The fact that blogs in Korea were writing that I had said this let me know there really was a following. And so we went ahead and implemented it.
And Overstock.com was the first publicly held company to take Bitcoin payments?
First $1 billion company. I think until we did it, the biggest company was about $1 million company. So I like to think I saved them about, at the rate they've been growing, I saved them going through the 10 million, 100 million phase, and they got to $1.5 billion. We'll probably do pretty close to $2 billion this year. So I like to think I saved them half a dozen years. So anyway, that's how it came about.
Okay. People have asked me what I thought about Bitcoin, and in my mind, eventually something like this is going to be pervasive, but I'm not sure that it's the perfect solution is going to be found this soon. So
that could be. It has its charm. It shares the charms of gold and silver in that there's a limited quantity and no government mandarin can create more of it. On the other hand, unlike gold and silver, there's nothing physically to possess. On the other hand, also unlike gold and silver, you can beam it across the galaxy, Bitcoin. So that in our age, that has some virtues too. But to me, I'm really a fan of the crypto revolution. I don't have any particular allegiance to Bitcoin or Dogecoin or anything. To me, the technology that underlies Bitcoin is going to be able to do a lot of other things in the world.
Do you have any last thoughts you'd like to share with your readers?
Great to be at Freedom Fest. I forgot, I've spoken at a couple of these. I've been at a number more, and it's great to be here with a lot of pro-freedom activists and thinkers.
Well, thank you for taking some time to talk with me today, Patrick. You've been listening to Patrick Byrne, the founder and CEO of Overstock.com, on Liberty Coin Services' Things You Need to Know series.